Ladies and gentlemen, our next event of the evening is a one-fall match with a 60-minute time limit.
Where the big boys play.
This is where the big boys play, huh?
The big boys play.
This is where the big boys play.
All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Nima Parvini, known on some wrestling forums as Jerry Von Kramer, and this is Where the Big Boys Play, which is a new show that I've thought about doing for a while here, where we're going to be reviewing some classic NWA pay-per-views, and I'm here with Chad. Say hello, Chad.
Hey, how's it going?
And Chad, you're known as a Soup 23 on some of the forums there, right?
Yeah, I'm known as Soup 23 on pretty much all the wrestling forums I post at.
Yeah, and you've been around a while because on the well-known kind of Smart forums, right?
Yeah, I've been on Death Valley Driver, I think, since around 2001.
Wow.
I remember when they did the Death Valley Driver 500s, and that was a time when a lot of the indie boom was going on as far as Combat Zone Wrestling and Ring of Honor was starting up. So I've been around that forum since then, and then I found ProWrestlingOnly.com in early 2008 and been on there since then. Yeah,
no, well, as for myself, I mean, I've bounced around a little bit. I struggle to find a forum that I really like posting on. I spent some time on the old WrestleCrap ones, and I went to WrestleZone, and I pretty much hated those places, where, like Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels is the be-all and end-all, and nobody can remember, nobody can even remember, like, Paul Orndorff, let alone any of these guys that we're looking at tonight. And then I actually found Pro Wrestling Only through Will's podcast, the Goodwill Wrestling.
Okay.
I'm a long time, but I listened to the old school wrestling podcast that Flair Chop put out, and I think Goodwill Wrestling came on there, and I was like, who is this guy? Who are these guys who they really know their stuff? They're talking about things in real detail, and that led me to Pro Wrestling Only. And then obviously through there to DVDR, which I don't really post at DVDR apart from in the 80s project there. But so yeah, I mean, it's been a real enlightenment past couple of years, having seen some of these people who've got real knowledge of the territories and knowledge that I can only ever dream of, really. So just to explain, the basic idea here. There's a lot of wrestling podcasts out there. Plenty of them go through, the Raws and the SmackDowns, which I have absolutely no interest in. But there's also quite a few which look at old school wrestling pay-per-views. In fact, there's at least 3 or 4 which kind of specialize in that. But they tend to take as their starting point WrestleMania 1, and then they go through the WWF pay-per-views. And there's at least 3 different ones I can think of that start there in 1985 and basically move forward through all Vince's programs. So my idea was, well, why isn't there one for the NWA and the WCW pay-per-views? And what would it be like if I found somebody who'd be willing to do this with me? And started at Starrcade 83 and basically see what life was like in the other promotion, especially as I was pretty much a WWF guy growing up, as a lot of people were. And I think I'd seen Soup 23 there posting across the forums, and he just stood out to me as somebody who maybe on a similar kind of level of knowledge and experience as I am. Because would you agree with that, Chad? That I guess there are people there who know everything, right?
Yeah, I would say most of my wrestling experience, I'm kind of one of these people where when I get into a certain promotion or style, I want to consume all of that. So like I said, when I first started going on with Death Valley Driver, I was really into the indies. So I've watched every Ring of Honor show to 2006, watched every CCW show, watched every IWA Mid-South show I could get a hold of. But with that, I neglected a ton of other stuff. So there's a lot of kind of gray areas where I don't have as much knowledge or reference for the wrestling.
Yeah, but you now have an interest in going back and looking at some of this AC stuff, and you know some of this stuff I am certainly not familiar with. This is the first time I'd seen Starrcade '83, for example, and I think you said it was the second time that you've seen it, right?
Right. I mean, I know I've seen the main matches. I would say the top 3 matches, I'd at least seen all of those around 3 different times. But as far as the show start to finish, I think I watched it once, maybe. But the first 4 or 5 matches I had no memory of. So actually writing down notes from them was a new experience.
Yeah, so just before we get into this, I guess maybe it'd be worth just saying a little bit about where we're coming from as wrestling fans. You just gave us a little bit there that you were into the indies in the kind of early 2000s. How about before that? Like, when did you start watching? And where are you from? And how has that impacted on you as a wrestling fan?
Okay, I was born in 1986. I started watching wrestling at a very early age, around 3 or 4. The first memory that I have of wrestling is the Hulk Hogan versus Earthquake feud, heading into SummerSlam 1990.
Right.
I was a big WWF fan in the early 90s. And then gradually kind of drifted towards WCW around 1994.
Right, yeah.
I really connected with the Colonel Robert Parker, Flying Brian feud of all things with the chicken suit. That was one thing that really tilted it to WCW, and then the NWO was a big part of it. And then I actually stayed on board with WCW throughout the downfall, whereas even, I would say, into late 1999, I would always prefer watching Nitro to Raw, which I think was a little different for most people at that time.
Yeah.
But since then, like I said, then I started getting into the indies and Puro, and now it's kind of, with the 80s projects and the yearbook sets, it's been nice to kind of go back and evaluate some of the stuff from my childhood and beyond and see what holds up, what the main themes were, and whatnot.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you were a big WWF fan coming from Georgia. I guess it...
Yeah, I lived in Georgia almost my whole life, but I just think the characters in the WWF really was what drew me to them. I still watch the Power Hour.
Yeah.
On Saturday mornings, I remember the old TV show Bonanza would go off and Power Hour would start up. But yeah, I always were more pro WWF in the early years, and then gradually turned to WCW.
I guess it just goes to show what a big, how over WWF was by 1990. That, even in like a traditional hotbed for WCW or Crockett, like Georgia, that, there'd still be guys who were basically WWF guys down there. For myself, I'm from the UK, as you may be able to tell from my accent here, and I'm from a little town in Wales. I live in London now. I was born in 1982, so I'm just about to turn 30 soon, and really so in the US, as I understand it, you guys have always had a lot of cable television, right? Everything's always cable.
Well, yeah, I had cable when I was probably 5 years old.
So in the UK, up until I'd say probably the early 2000s, there were only ever 4 channels terrestrial TV. We had BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and Channel 4. And that was it as far as your free television went. And if you wanted to have anything else, you really had to get a satellite dish. So we didn't really have cable. Cable never took off in this country at all. It was more satellite TV, and the major provider for that was Sky. So if you wanted to watch WWF, I think Vince had a contract with Sky very early on, like even in the kind of late 80s, he'd already got that contract sorted out. And I think you had to get Sky TV. And my parents, they didn't have Sky TV. You know, it was really expensive. So basically, they never got it. So when I was a kid, I didn't actually have I didn't have WF TV. However, a lot of the kids around the same time, actually, around 1990, around that time of that earthquake feud, I guess, wrestling was pretty over with kids in school, and there was a lot of tapes flying around. So I had all of the WrestleMania 1 to 6 and all of those kind of early pay-per-views. I used to watch those over and over. I've probably seen WrestleMania 5 about 100 times. So that was really what it was at that point. And then WCW bizarrely came on one of our terrestrial channels for free at about 2:00 in the morning. It had like a graveyard slot, and even though I was only 9 or 10 or something, at that time I would set the video recorder on timer, and I would tape it and try to watch it. And even sometimes, being a bit nuts as I used to stay up. Even though I was 10, I used to stay up till 2 a.m. Watching. I think it must have been Saturday night that they were showing there. It was Jesse and Tony Schiavone were the hosts at that point. I think Jim Ross was there for a while as well. But what used to happen is that I'd watch the weekly TV, and obviously they hadn't signed a contract to get the pay-per-views. So I'd be watching. We'd build to something like a Super Brawl. And then the next week, it would just show the aftermath. So we'd never get the show. We'd never get the blow-offs. And they also, because obviously nobody at ITV cared about wrestling or about WCW, it used to jump around. So, they'd be showing TV from, early 92, and then it suddenly jumped to 93. And, all the guys were different. So it was very difficult to keep track of it. They didn't really cater for us very well. And then, I guess... all throughout this time as well, if any of my friends had Sky, I'd go over and I'd watch any kind of prime time I could, or any of the satellite WF shows that they used to show. And my mum had this friend called Phyllis Bradford, who was like a 60-year-old woman. And weirdly, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but in the UK, there's quite a lot of old women who are into wrestling. And my mum had this friend who just happened to be into it, and she lived across the street. So for about a year, I used to go over there to watch. I watched the entire build of King of the Ring '93, for example, over hers. But then again, we couldn't get the show until it came out on video. So there'd always be a massive time lag. Yeah. And the other thing I remember is that there was this one little shop in town. And you got to remember, I'm in a little town in Wales here, and it had PWI, so I used to buy that and keep track of all the stuff that was going on. But it was pretty difficult, I think, if you were into wrestling and didn't have a satellite dish to keep track of what was going on. And then finally, about 96, 97, my parents did get Sky, so I was on board in time for the Monday Night Wars, and it used to air on a Friday in the UK, and me and my brother would have a tradition. We'd get Chinese, and we'd sit down and we'd watch Raw. So we watched pretty much all of that, and we did see a bit of Nitro as well, but that they would do it so that the first hour of Nitro was on at 8 p.m. and then the second hour would overlap with the first hour of Raw, and usually we'd switch over, to be honest. So yeah, that's a bit about me. And then basically when I was a student, this was around 2001, 2002, I had this big student loan, and it was in my third year, and I had about $2,000 in my bank account from this loan. And I went a bit crazy and started collecting old VHS tapes, and I must have spent about over $1,000 on wrestling videos. And I'd get them I was in London in university, but I'd get them shipped to my parents' house back in Wales, and my mum would ring me up and we were like, another 4 videos came today. What are you doing? So I've got I basically got every single WF VHS from like WrestleMania 1 onwards until about 99, I guess, including all of like your super tapes, Smack and Whack 'em, all of that stuff with Mooney and Lord Alfred Hayes on there. And then I guess like a lot of people around that time, I got into some of the smart terminology, like learning about things on the internet, and that was kind of mind-blowing when you first find out about those things. I don't know if you can remember, but like just learning about terminology like faces and heels and crowd heat and all of this sort of thing. And then I guess around about the time of the brand split, I kind of totally lost interest with the current product of WWE as it became. And since about 2004, I've just kind of dedicated all my wrestling time to watching old stuff. So I'm a kind of 100% old school fan, as it were. I have no interest in what is going on. I'll probably watch WrestleMania, but like even for example, the WrestleMania just gone, after that 18-second match, I kind of turned it off. I didn't even bother watching the Rock match. So that's how much interest I have in current stuff. So yeah. So really, a lot of this for me will be catching up on stuff I was never able to watch. There was no, I don't think Mid-Atlantic TV would have ever aired in the UK. So yeah, shall we make a start? Do you think?
Yeah, let's go ahead and start. Sounds good.
Starrcade 83. Don't miss your chance to be part of the sports event of a lifetime. See Roddy Piper versus Greg Valentine, first time ever in a collar match. A Flair for the gold. Ric Flair versus Harley Race for the world's heavyweight title. And Jack and Jerry Briscoe versus Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood for the world's tag team title. Starrcade 83, Thanksgiving night in the Greensboro Coliseum. A Flair for the gold. Don't you miss it.
All right, so Starrcade 83 then. Obviously the very first major pay-per-view show, November 24th, 1983, from Greensboro, and the hosts were Bob Caudle and Gordon Solie. So as I understand it, obviously Caudle was the regular host of Mid-Atlantic TV, and his regular partner would have been David Crockett, right?
Right. Which I really am I know David Crockett has sort of a bad rep with a lot of people, but I kind of appreciate him just basically on his general excitement. So I don't know what shows he might be announcing on coming up that we go through, but I'm interested to see if I still appreciate just what all he brought to the table as far as an excitement level.
Yeah, David Crockett is a lot of fun. I've been enjoying him on watching some of the old Horseman stuff on that amazing set that I have, the Horseman set. But I did have a look, and apparently David Crockett doesn't really do any of the major shows. I don't know what the deal was there, but maybe he was too busy behind the scenes, or maybe they didn't want to put him on the big shows. But he doesn't. Maybe a little bit like the way that Vince isn't really on the first. He makes his pay-per-view debut, Vince McMahon, I think, in 1990. I think probably at SummerSlam 90. And David Crockett, as far as I can see, doesn't do any of the shows. I think it goes from they obviously brought in Solie here. So Gordon Solie wasn't on Mid-Atlantic TV. He was really a Florida guy, right?
Right.
And he did
in Georgia some too.
So I think at this time he was with Georgia and with Florida. And as I understand it, this Starrcade card, even though Jim Crockett Promotions was putting it on, it's not 100% a JCP show. So that there are guys from Georgia and Florida throughout this card, and also from Puerto Rico and maybe some other territories as well. So it's kind of like the idea of a supercard is that it's inter-promotional. There are guys from all across the NWA territories, all on the same card. So I'm guessing the thinking of bringing in Solie was to make it feel like a bigger deal, right?
Yeah, I would think he would be the most recognizable commentator overall that they probably could have gotten for this show.
Yeah, and I think they brought him back for next year, but after '84, I think he's largely gone, Solie.
Right.
So we don't see him again. So yeah, I mean the first match. Shall we get into this first match? The Assassins versus Rufus R. Jones and Bugsy McGraw.
Yeah, one thing I would just like to mention before that is I always kind of find it interesting that these shows like this one happened on Thanksgiving night. And I know as a kid, once I first started getting into wrestling in the early 90s, Survivor Series always happened on Thanksgiving Eve. When I first started getting pay-per-views, it was on Thanksgiving Eve from like Survivor Series 1991 to 1994. So there's some nostalgia there because I always remember like the show being on and people preparing for Thanksgiving dinner the next day and kind of a lot going on in the house. So that's kind of neat.
And would people kind of make time to watch the big wrestling show, or would it just be on in the background?
I mean, my mom and grandparents and whatever didn't pay any attention to it, but most of the shows my dad would watch with me.
Right.
He was a casual fan, but you know, he was basically a fan through my fandom, but he would watch most of the pay-per-views with me.
And I think that is one of the big differences that we may find going forward here. That really in the UK, wrestling is not a thing. You know, it's just not in the. It's not really part of the culture. I mean, still even today, if you ask people of a certain generation to name some wrestlers, they'll probably name Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks. You know, the old world.
Right.
Right. So wrestling had a kind of boom in the late '70s. Or in the '70s, Big Daddy was pretty over at that time. But then, like, I think World of Sport died a death kind of by the mid '80s. It was pretty much done. And a lot of people just don't they just see wrestling as a kind of joke. You know, even back then and even now, like, it's never really been given any legitimacy. I'm not even sure, I remember a lot of people saying that the death of Randy Savage was given big mainstream coverage in the States. I'd be really surprised if it made any news at all here. You know, maybe one of the tabloid newspapers would have reported it, but so it's kind of like it's just not in if you're into wrestling in the UK, you're kind of into it on your own. I mean, that's the other thing I was going to mention as well. Probably the peak of wrestling's overness with kids was 1992, which is a little bit after the UK. A little bit after the US had its kind of, I'd say wrestling in the the boom era probably peaked in about 87, 88. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I know when I first started watching, there was a couple of people at school that still, were into it, but it was mostly Hogan, Warrior. You sort of picked a side. So that was, pretty much the two that most kids would probably know who were. And Sting, where I lived at, was also pretty notable. But other than that, yeah, it was pretty limited knowledge.
So for us, I mean, I never really remember Hogan being that over. Really, the kids, if you go by who they had on their lunch boxes, who they had on their, people had rucksacks, WF rucksacks and things. Warrior was definitely very, very over, and so was Bret Hart. Bret Hart seemed to be the guy who everyone loved. So the peak, I'd say, was 92. That was the time of SummerSlam 92. I know a few guys who went to that, and everybody was into wrestling at that time. I mean, around the time Money Inc. with the Champs, and Bret was kind of getting his big singles push. By the time that Luger comes in '93, it was pretty much it had died a death. Nobody, it was, the people into wrestling was like me. There was nobody else.
I would agree with that here too. By about 1993, 1994, 95, I was kind of on an island. That's the only one that was still watching, really, to the NWO.
So really, like, say in '95, if you wanted to talk about wrestling with somebody, it would usually be in terms of remember the WWF type thing.
Right.
It was like
right.
It was something that happened in '91, '92, and that's kind of when it ends. And even now, like most of my friends, they only really remember that kind of particular time period and the characters from then. And I mean, I guess some people jumped back on board on the Monday Night Wars, but I get the impression it was kind of a new generation of fans. Guys a little bit younger than me. A lot of people my age wouldn't have jumped back on board at that point. Just from the people I know, like say say of about 300 people in my year, maybe there were like 2 other guys who watched wrestling. So it was like, it was never that kind of popular. Anyway, getting back to the Assassins versus Rufus R. Jones and Bugsy McGraw. We should. I had never seen Rufus R. Jones or Bugsy McGraw. I've never even heard of these guys until they cropped up here on this match, and they immediately irritated me because they did a lot of that chucking and jiving kind of late 70s, early 80s babyface shtick. And really, like, there was a lot of guys who had this as their gimmick, really. Thunderbolt Patterson, Pork Chop Cash, I remember seeing on the Mid-South set. It's basically Dusty Rhodes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a cheap imitation of Dusty Rhodes' kind of basic offense that they kind of do, whether it seems like they move around to sort of try to create an illusion that a lot of action is going on. When you really start to analyze it, there's not a whole lot happening.
So for me, there's nothing more alienating than a dancing babyface. I just can't understand why anybody would cheer for those guys. And it seemed to be that around this time, if you were a babyface and you weren't kind of like a technical wrestler like Ricky Steamboat, you did dancing of this nature. And it's alienating. I can't relate to it at all. It just seems like this is something that seems like it's from an era way beyond what I could possibly relate to.
Yeah, you still get, even in indie shows that I've been in the past couple of years, you still get kind of the fiery, most of them are black wrestlers coming out, dancing around. And sort of the same type of offense that you saw in this match. So not much has changed.
So what was your? I should mention here, the Assassins, of course, are Jody Hamilton, who's basically, the Assassins were a long-running team, as I understand, who had many different iterations over the years. I think they started even in the '60s.
Yeah.
And I think the guy's name is Tom Renesto.
Yep.
And he was like, he became, from what I've picked up, like a kind of on-air interviewer or even authority figure for Georgia around this time. So like he was on air, but I'm not sure if it was acknowledged that he was one of the original Assassins. And then like Renesto retired pretty early on, and Hamilton had a variety of different partners. And the guy under the mask this time is basically Hercules Hernandez, right?
Correct. Yes.
So
early Hercules Hernandez.
A pretty skinny Hercules Hernandez at this time.
Yeah, he looked really. During the match, they were commenting that he was the powerhouse and whatnot, but he certainly did not look as shredded as he would in his WWF days.
Yeah, and Jody Hamilton supporting quite the paunch at this stage in his career. I mean, I guess he was pretty old by this point.
Yeah, I think Jody was on the way down by this time.
And they had Paul Jones in there. Paul Jones in their corner, I saw there.
Yeah, Paul Jones.
Yeah.
Sporting a nice tuxedo, if I might add.
Yeah. I mean, people, when the greatest managers conversation comes up, some people bandy the name of Paul Jones around. I've never really seen. I've seen him a few times. I've never really seen anything from him to suggest that he's even in that conversation. Have you seen any Paul Jones yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a little bit of him with the Jimmy Valiant long-running multi-year feud that they ended up having, and I mean that that's interesting as a mid-card kind of entertaining feud, but I would certainly not put him in the upper echelon with like the Heenans or the Jimmy Harts in Memphis, that kind of ilk.
He was like a mid-card manager, right? He kind of did he kind of like, was probably like a Slick or a Mr. Fuji level manager rather than a...
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, for instance, as far as Jimmy Hart in Memphis, I mean, there was years of the promotion that were essentially revolved around his army versus Lawler. Yeah. And you didn't really get a sense of that here with Paul.
So, this was a pretty weak opener as far as I've just written in my notes here, really shitty babyfaces, pinfall out of nowhere. I mean, is there anything else to say about this match?
Yeah, it was pretty awful. I mean, it was about 8 minutes of Bugsy and Rufus dancing around, gaining the advantage. You had a face in peril section for about 30 seconds, and then the hot tag, and then the pinfall for the Assassins out of nowhere. And that was it. One thing I found that was weird was Gordon Solie kept bringing up that Bugsy had a business administration degree, which I thought was very bizarre, that he kind of went with that as his main tagline. I don't know how familiar he was with Bugsy, but...
He also seemed to be obsessed with the size difference between the two assassins. Like, every single time Hercules was in the ring, he'd be talking about how the other assassin was bigger.
Yeah, to me, I think just overall, the commentary, I think, settled down, but I don't know if they were sort of settling in, or even if they were familiar with each other here, or kind of getting a gauge of the show, but it was kind of herky-jerky in this match, I thought.
I actually thought for the first half of the card that Solie was really kind of like, he seemed like a guy who's awkward, like just wasn't comfortable being on TV. Like he kept, and obviously this is Gordon Solie. He was probably like in his third decade as a commentator by this point. But he like did a lot of umming and ahhing, and like he said, he said a lot, like he was trying to think of what to say.
I understand went on down to Winston-Salem to pick us up, of course, on the closed circuit TV broadcast, and a great opportunity for everybody.
Right.
Which was a little bit jarring. It was kind of like, what's going on here? It seemed like it wasn't smooth at all. Yeah.
He mispronounced Tony Schiavone's name, which I thought was humorous. He called him Schiavone.
Yeah, or
I appreciated that.
He called him Schiavone, didn't he? It was Schiavone a lot of the time.
We'll be also hearing tonight from Barbara Clary and Tony Schiavone.
Yeah.
I should just mention here that if you can picture, I mean, Bugsy McGraw was just this fat, out of shape guy, bald, kind of looked a tiny bit like a even fatter version of Barzukov, maybe someone like that. Like he really didn't look very good at all.
Yeah, the only time I've seen Bugsy before this was there was a couple of matches of him in Texas, where he faced Checkmate and the Magic Dragon. And in those matches, he mixed in decent wrestling and some actually pretty good comedy spots, I thought. But we had none of that here.
No. I did a little bit of reading about him, and he had he used to be a footballer, right?
Yeah. Gordon kept mentioning that too. He didn't even really know which college he went at, though. I think he ended up going with Indiana, but. He seemed unsure.
If Solie doesn't know where you graduated, that's probably a suggestion that you're not that over, I guess. But first kind of major pay-per-view match in history. This is pretty shoddy stuff,
Yeah.
So then we get moving past that match, we get our first glimpse of Tony Schiavone. He's pretty young here. He must be kind of like, he couldn't be too much older than 23 or 24, if I had to guess. And I've just written, seems like a natural, much more comfortable on camera than either Coddle or Solie. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I thought Tony actually did a really good job with the backstage interviews here. And actually Barbara Clary, which I think we might get to at some point in time. But I'd never heard of her. I was expecting kind of a Susan St. James WrestleMania 2 type situation, but she held it together better than I thought she would.
I mean, she spent most of the show going around asking various fans who they think would win the main event.
Yeah, it wasn't. They definitely limited her to where she didn't have to give any deep-thoughted analysis.
Yeah.
But she did seem generally enthused about the show she was at.
That was one of the things that did strike me about this show. There's a lot of interviews, a lot of non-match stuff, which really surprised me because having watched a lot of kind of later, early kind of WCW stuff, they tend not to have any interviews at all. It's just kind of like, the Turner videos are just kind of match, very few interviews. And here, I'd say maybe half the total running time was backstage stuff.
Yeah, I didn't give a count, but I would say there was probably no less than 5 Ric Flair interviews throughout the entire show. It got pretty redundant by the end of it.
Yeah, and they really gave that main event some serious hype here. They kept on going back between the locker rooms of Race and Flair.
Yeah, they definitely made it seem like a huge event and match.
So after we get this little bit of Shivani, we go to our second match, another tag match, which is Johnny Weaver and Scott McGee versus Kevin Sullivan and Mark Lewin. As I understand it, I think Sullivan and Lewin would have been from Florida, right? I know Sullivan had a big Florida run around this time. Had you seen any of these guys before?
I'd never seen McGee or Weaver before that I could remember. My experience with Lewin was very limited, just a handful of matches. And actually Sullivan, one of the notes I had was, Sullivan, I think if you're a pretty hardcore type wrestling fan, Kevin Sullivan is definitely someone that would pop up a lot in the 80s. And I don't know if it's a lack of footage or what, but it kind of striked me that of all the big names, I may have seen the least amount of footage from him. I've seen a lot of his Varsity Club stuff, and then of course in the 90s saw his whole run as the Taskmaster and whatnot.
Yep.
But in his 80s, I know his Florida devil worshipping footage is extremely limited, and it just doesn't seem like there's a ton out there for somebody that was a main event player in some territories.
He wasn't that weird here. I was expecting Sullivan maybe to be more kind of strange. Solie mentioned at one point that he's suspected of being a druid.
And then he said he wouldn't be surprised if he was, which I thought was a humorous line.
Yeah, and Solie also mentioned as this show started out that this broadcast is prohibited. Any part of this show is prohibited without permission of Jim Crockett Promotions, which made me chuckle a little bit in retrospect.
Right.
Johnny Weaver, I believe, became kind of like a sort of interviewer a little bit later on. I've seen him on some of the '85 Horseman stuff, as a kind of on-screen interviewer on one of those Mid-Atlantic shows. So he must be really near the end of his in-ring career here. But I thought he looked really good in this match.
Yeah, I thought this match was really chugging along pretty good. I made a note that McGee in the early goings, he did a nice escape from an armbar where he kind of did an up and over on I think it was Lewin to reverse it. It was sort of a British looking counter, and I thought that was very well done. Both of the Face in Peril segments were good, but then we sort of had a real abrupt ending again, which kind of brought the match down a notch.
Yeah, I actually thought Lewin's offense was a little bit lacking during the heat segment there. A bit kind of, and then a really, really lame finish. Kind of, I guess this was a time before kind of finishes ended every match. Like, a match can end with an elbow drop or a slam, or somebody just giving a stomp and then going for a pin attempt.
Yeah, that's going to be something that we will have to get used to, because here you didn't even get a hot tag. They were cranking on the arm, and then Sullivan came off with a knee drop from the top, and then I sort of had to rewind it to make sure that was it, because it was so shocking that, that was it.
Yeah, I actually thought it made this seem really lame. Like, I mean, I know it's a different mindset, but it's very difficult after years of being programmed to expect a big finish for a pay-per-view match to then just, readjust yourself for this pin out of the blue, which I suppose the more important, the more kind of exciting stuff happened after the match finished. There was a pretty brutal beatdown here.
Yeah.
So they have what do they have? Is it like a spike, did they say?
It looked like a kind of spike-looking thing, but you couldn't... One thing I'll say is, I don't know if it's the version of the tape that I watched for this was the 24/7 version.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
And the arena looked very dark.
Yeah, very dark.
So it was very tough in this match, and in the next match, the Abdullah match. It was very tough to kind of see exactly what type of weapons or whatever they were using to attack. But yeah, McGee, he got some good blood. They kept talking about Angelo Moscow, I guess, ran down and he got hit in the arm, which they kept emphasizing. But to me, McGee looked like he took the worst of it.
Yeah, he looked really... he was he had the crimson mask there at the end. And he was... I just written that it was really brutal, this beatdown, compared to the kind of very pedestrian stuff we've seen. I think the show kind of has its first glimpse of being something more than anything more than boring, I guess.
Right.
They were taken from this to our first look at Harley Race. So he gives a promo here, and Race is sporting the moustache that goes into a beard. So he doesn't have like the goatee part. He just has a moustache that goes up to his sideburns. And I've written a note here that he looks a bit like the fake Mad Hatter out of the Batman comics. So
yeah, I made a note of his mustache was glorious here, where essentially his sideburns and his mustache connect. It's really good, and I really love this interview where he kind of talks about how he's been talking to the other heels around him, Slater and Orton and all that, and he knows all of Flair's weaknesses, which I thought was really smart, because him being the NWA champion, he would be touring and making stops in all the different territories overseas and what have you, so he would not be around to kind of get the day in, day out feel of what was going on, so I really enjoyed this interview.
Yeah, it was. He was kind of like throughout the show. He was kind of quite subdued. He never shouted. He was a very quiet. In fact, both Flair and Race were very quiet in these interviews.
Real low key.
Yeah, we still hadn't got into. I guess they still hadn't got into that kind of mid-80s shouty style that we're also used to. But it's quite interesting. It makes it really. It does seem like a psychological battle even beforehand. And I guess we can get more into the angle going into the main event a little bit later.
Sure.
But yeah, this was an interesting first look at Race, and he was touring at this time. But as I understand it, he wasn't with Mid Atlantic. He was with he kind of always wrestles out of St. Louis, right? Out of the kind of the mid state. What's that territory called?
Central States.
The Central States, kind of Kansas. Kansas, is it? Or just St. Louis?
Yeah, Kansas City.
Yeah,
he kind of had a stake in that territory, which I haven't watched. I know most people that have watched a ton of territory stuff from the 80s say that is absolutely pretty much the worst of all the major ones that we have footage on.
It looks very boring, that Central State territory.
I can see it very, just with all the other stuff going on. And some of the other characters. I mean, I think Race is good in this median as like a low-key, burly champion figure, but I would not want to see, 20 of them in a promotion.
Yeah, and I think there was a little bit of backstage wrangling over the NWA title at this time. I think this whole show is kind of a big power play on Crockett's part to get the belt onto Flair and win control of the NWA belt, as far as I understand it.
Okay.
So moving on then, we have our first look here at Abdullah the Butcher, and he's taking on Carlos Colon. And I wondered if this match was no DQ, but apparently not. This is a standard, just a normal match. And these two had been feuding in Puerto Rico for some time, going into this. A little bit strange, I thought, to have this show on this card. Obviously, this was a massive deal in Puerto Rico, but I wonder if anybody in Greensboro really gave a shit.
Yeah, they kept talking about like some fans from Puerto Rico joining in, which I mean I have no idea if they would have the ability to watch this show. I kind of doubt it, but yeah, this seemed like a kind of obscure match. It was very short, bloody, usual hack and slash style that Abdullah brings. Not a lot going on. I have been to Abdullah's restaurant here in Atlanta. I live about 30 minutes from Atlanta. So I've been to Abdullah's restaurant, and
Did you see him?
It's a lot better than this match, I'll say that. The food is.
Now, I've got a note about... Did you actually see Abdullah there, by the way?
I did not see. I know most of the time they say he's sort of sitting there, kind of, I guess, he's notorious for trying to sell and gimmicks and whatnot, but he was not there when I went there. I went there for lunch.
Now I know Carlos Colon is considered a big star, probably a one territory star, but he was massive in Puerto Rico, right? Kind of like
Yeah, I would say of what I was talking about earlier with my blind spots in wrestling, Puerto Rico is really one of the biggest ones. I have not seen hardly any Puerto Rico footage, but I know he was pretty much a huge star down there.
Let's face it, though. Why would you have ever seen Puerto Rico TV? Like that's one of those things that I'm not sure if there's any point in going. Like, was there anything happen? I mean, I wonder if the TV showcasing Abdullah versus Carlos Colon is even worth going back to see.
Yeah, I don't know if some of this stuff will pop up when they do the territory set of the best of the 80s at Death Valley Driver, but that will be interesting. But yeah, I have no desire to get a whole season set or whatnot.
I don't want to be on that committee, I tell you that.
Yeah.
So a couple of little notes I put here. I put the Solie and Caudle are almost too straight-laced during this match. They're kind of like, they're so stiff. They're so kind of, straight down the line. I mean, I'm someone who's used to listening to Jesse Ventura and Gorilla Monsoon bickering, or even Vince and Jesse, or Monsoon and Heenan, and this is like as far away from that as you can get with these two, old guys, just very sensibly talking about Abdullah versus Carlos Colon here. How did you find that? Like, would you agree that they're almost too sensible, in a way?
Yeah, they were very definitely straight-laced throughout the show. Even when we get to the main events, they were not very animated, or you certainly didn't see any disagreement or bickering between the two. They both just sort of called it straight. It can be a little dry, but
I was also interested in was Coddle meant to be the color man here, or were they both play-by-play guys?
I got the sense that Caudle was supposed to be the color man, but it kind of felt like when Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone was the color guy.
Yeah.
Sort of felt like kind of that, where you really had two play-by-play guys, and somebody just sort of had to be forced into more of a color role.
And then in the interview segments, it was usually Caudle asking the questions and Solie giving analysis as well, which is
that was weird. Yes.
Anyway, we get a little bit more color during this match. I think a couple of blade jobs here. But it's just way too short to be meaningful, this.
Yeah, 4 minutes. Hugo Savina just runs down to interfere, which I don't think I've ever seen him anywhere else besides behind the Spanish announce team booth in WWF. Pretty much a nothing match.
Yeah, and considering this was meant to be such a big feud, it probably deserved more. But then I wonder if this was even the right crowd to have this match in front of.
Yeah, I think a different setting probably.
So then we're taken backstage again, and Angelo Mosca is angry. What did you think of this promo?
Oh, Angela, this was pretty bad. Just basically him stating that even though they attacked his arm, he was still going to referee the tag title match tonight, which I don't know why that would be such a great feat, but
And this Angelo Mosca was also a football guy beforehand, before he was a wrestler.
Right.
They seem to do quite a lot of this. I think it was a standard, well-worn path. So after the pro football career is over, they make the transition to be a wrestler. And was he? Would you say is he Italian? Did he have a quite of Italian American accent?
I'm not. I would guess that, but I'm not positive.
And McGee is a mess here. He's
yeah, he looked awful.
So then we have another interview with a couple of random female fans who both think that Ric Flair is going to win. And then we have our first real kind of, I'd say, big match on the card, which had, a real build, which is Bob Orton, Dick Slater versus Wahoo McDaniel and Mark Youngblood. And there's a bit of previous here. Orton and Slater are big allies of Harley Race. And Harley Race had put up a bounty on Ric Flair's head for $25,000, which was taken up by Orton and Slater. And they basically did a job on him. They gave him a assisted pile driver, which injured his neck. Wahoo McDaniel, big mates of Ric Flair, kind of made a save, I think, when they tried to attack him again, like while Flair was recovering. And I guess Mark Youngblood, as another Native American, is just naturally tags with Wahoo, and so that's kind of the background of this. And going into the match, Tommy Miller, who is the announcer, he tries to introduce Dusty Rhodes, but the mic fails while he's doing the announcing. Then Solie and Coddle think that Dusty Rhodes is going to come out anyway, and he doesn't turn up.
That was awkward, where they sort of had a pause, introduced him, we got a pop from the crowd, and then after about 30 seconds, he just started introducing the team.
Yeah, this was quite a clusterfuck there, and it just I guess teething problems. Nobody put on an event of this magnitude before. Although I say that this was 16,000 people. There'd been super shows before this, right? This is just the first one that kind of went out.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen the Final Conflict, which has the Knurtle Slaughter cage match, which I think it was in the summer of '83. That's the one where they supposedly were turning away thousands of fans at the door, and a lot of people think that was sort of like a precursor to doing this Starrcade show. So that was kind of the one that comes right off the top of my head as a show of that magnitude. And then, like in World Class, they had the Star Wars shows on Christmas night, 1982. Yeah. With the Flair Kerry cage match, and but none of those were closed circuited. So
that's what makes this the real. And I'm guessing those old WF MSG shows, Bruno Sammartino versus Heel of the Day, they would have probably got gates as big as this as well, right?
Right. Yeah, I would assume so. Absolutely.
And they went out on that MSG network. But yeah, I guess this is still considered the first show where people could pay to watch this on a big screen. That's what.
Yeah, and I think the branding too is very good. And that, you knew it was Starrcade '83, so that was nice. It just wasn't wrestling on Thanksgiving night. It was Starrcade. So I think that was very smart.
So I've written here that this match, Wahoo and Youngblood versus Orton and Slater, is the first decent wrestling we see on this show. The heels look exceptional in this match. Orton gives us 3 different variants of cool backbreakers. He does one where he kind of like does a gorilla press and turns it into a backbreaker.
Yeah, that was great.
Then he does a standard backbreaker, and then later on he does a backbreaker kind of on the side onto the steel rails. And then we see from Slater a gut wrench suplex, as Solie calls it. Yeah, the heels just look really good here. They look like great kind of technical wrestlers.
Yeah, Slater and Orton, I think, make a really good team. They both are able to mix up a lot of styles well. Wahoo is somebody that, I've just completely ignored in my childhood and thought he was just sort of one of those brawling Indian wrestlers that was basically a gimmick. But the more you watch of him, the more he's grown on me as a great brawler, wrestler, able to structure a match. He wasn't in this match as much as I would have liked, but I thought Youngblood did a pretty good job when taking the offense from Slater and Orton.
He was the face in peril here, and Wahoo was the hot tag. And
right.
Youngblood looked really good. He was pretty good at selling there, and Slater was kind of in his still in his Terry Funk phase here. He was basically doing a lot of Funk spots, the Texas fists and that barking dog thing that Funk does.
Yeah, there was kind of a lot of sort of delayed selling too, where he was staggering as he got hit and whatnot. I've seen Slater really work some great technical matches versus Jumbo Ceruto on the All Japan set.
Yes, he was pretty good at that.
This was not that, but I thought he was effective here also.
Of course, there's going to be a lot of Wahoo on the AWA set.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to.
Well, one thing I just mentioned about Wahoo McDaniel, I've mentioned this many times before, but whenever, even as late as 86, whenever Flair does his big promos where he's listing all the big faces in the company and all the people he's taken on in his career, he always makes a point of mentioning Wahoo McDaniel.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that always struck me as why is he's still mentioning Wahoo in 87? What's going on? But apparently, Flair has a huge amount of respect for Wahoo, and there's a specific reason why he keeps on making sure he acknowledges that. I think he put him over a few times when he was younger. I think this was easily the best match so far.
The finish was a little weird. Youngblood kind of botched a drop kick. I don't know if Slater was supposed to hold on to Orton or exactly what happened, but that looked a little awkward. And then the end, where Orton suplexes him, and Wahoo, I think, was supposed to be held by Slater instead of breaking up the pin, but he was kind of there right at the 3 count, so it was a little confusing. But the actual structure of the match was really good.
It's actually a superplex from Orton.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty high spot. Solie says you don't get up from that.
Yeah, it definitely did not feel like a cheap finish with the superplex.
One of the notes I've made during this match is that Wahoo's offense is really, really what I describe as babyface offense. Chops, inverted atomic drop, body slam, atomic drop. Those are face moves. No heels do those moves.
Yeah, Orton's selling on the atomic drop was Rick Rude levels. Great too. He really looked in pain.
So then after the match we have a great kind of post-match beatdown here. You can tell Dusty was booking this show because every single match has a post-match.
Every single match.
And there's a little bit where I think Slater considers coming off the top to kind of hit Wahoo's arm, and then he, for whatever reason, doesn't do it, and then Orton does exactly the same thing and actually hits it. So Do they actually break Wahoo's arm here? I think this, in the story, this is the breaking of Wahoo's arm.
Oh, okay.
So we that was a pretty good match, and we go back to Tony Schiavone, and we have an interview with Flair, Steamboat, and Jay Youngblood here, Mark Youngblood's older brother, and Flair is in his kind of serious, downbeat mood here, and I heard a great thing once. I can't remember who said it, but that there's really two different Ric Flairs. There's the Carolina Ric Flair and the Minnesota Ric Flair, and this is definitely Minnesota Flair, right?
Yeah, this was. One thing that I really love about Flair is he can do these sort of downplayed, mostly when he's a babyface, promos, and they're very effective, and they really get you invested in the match, and totally believable. And in the same sense, he can do the jacket flying, running around in his underwear, pitching a fit on the worldwide set promos, and they're equally as effective and believable. So that's really impressive that he can go from, two extremes, and both of them can be so well done.
Yeah, and Steamboat and Youngblood also kind of have they're in the same mode here. Nobody shouts. They're all kind of serious, I guess modest. Nobody's really talking themselves up. Nobody's saying they're the greatest thing on earth. They're all just kind of like good, honest sportsmen who are looking forward to their matches.
Right.
Then we take him to Dusty Rhodes again.
Oh my God, this guy can't catch a break.
And he has mic problems again. So
This was very bizarre because you had him we were getting essentially every fifth word that he was saying. Gordon just started talking completely over that. Yeah. So this was a mess.
Yeah, and a Solie summary of a Dusty promo is it doesn't really give you any kind of the same effect there, and it's quite funny because Dusty's really animated and you can't hear a word he says.
Oh yeah, Dusty is going crazy. Gordon informs us that he's challenging the winner of the cage match. How he knows that, I have no idea based on what we've heard, but Dusty's giving his typical fired up promo, and all you hear is Gordon kind of monotonely talking about it, which is pretty humorous.
Considering this is such a big night for Dusty, he must have been pissed here. He must have, I bet you, when that camera went away, he pulled a massive hissy fit. Because
probably was not a happy camera. One thing, they do have some audio problems, but one thing I will say is some of the video, it was dark in the arena, but some of the camera angles, when they did the from the ceiling looking down on the ring camera angle, I thought that was fabulous.
Yeah, especially during the main event. I had the note about that as well. You see an Irish whip into the corner, and it looks incredible from that overhead camera. They should use that more, They should bring that back, probably.
Absolutely. So, it kind of, you had a mix of good and bad as far as the production side of things.
One thing about Dusty Rhodes, he's always accused of, putting himself over as a booker and stuff. He could have very easily given himself a match on this show, and he didn't, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's one thing I wrote a note about, too, that I was surprised that he did not. I don't know if he was legitimately hurt or what the deal was.
Yeah, I'd have thought maybe, Dusty could have had a match. One thing I'm not aware of is what was Dusty's relationship with Flair and with Race like at this time? Because obviously, he was touted as the big kind of number 2 contender behind Flair. But I wasn't aware of if there was any ongoing storylines with those guys at this time. Because face Dusty and face Flair, I don't know what kind of relationship they'd have. He definitely wasn't a big friend of theirs, like Steamboat, or Steamboat was obviously the big buddy here, not
right.
Everybody is. Rhodes, how do you feel?
It's a big thrill to be in such a great... Three Flair for the goal. Ric Flair. Great in the left.
We're having a little bit of audio problems here. Dusty Rhodes
Still Dusty.
explaining how he feels about being here tonight, and obviously he is here to challenge the winner of this World Heavyweight Championship match, Dusty Rhodes, 2 times World Heavyweight Champion, the American Dream. And he is with Barbara Clary. Unfortunately, we are experiencing a bit of audio problems. We'll try and get this interview back for you a little bit later on.
This is the night for everybody remember wrestling history to be made.
And again, Dusty Rhodes said it all, though. Wrestling history is being made here tonight at the Greensboro Coliseum. No question about that.
And screaming. One of you rate Flair for the...
Well, if you can read his lips, you can tell what he's saying.
It's a good... Go boogie back up to the bottom.
He's talking about having such a good time, Gordon. He said he's got to go back up and...
Winner.
He's very
Not only is
interested
the
in
winner
that.
going to have to work the belt, but he's going to have to work a lot harder afterwards because he's got Dusty Rhodes to deal with.
Now we're going into, I think the next match was Charlie Brown from out of town versus the Great Kabuki with Gary Hart.
Yeah.
Title versus mask match. And Charlie Brown is basically Jimmy Valiant under a mask. I'm guessing...
Half a mask. The beard still hanging out.
I'm guessing without even needing to look this up, he'd lost some sort of loser-lose town match and had come back as Charlie Brown blatantly.
I would assume.
Yeah, and this was a big angle that they did over and over again. I know Junkyard Dog wrestled Stagger Lee, and it was kind of like a standard kind of cliche of territory era booking.
Yeah, I would say Bob Armstrong as the Bullet is actually probably the best example of that. Everything else has kind of been pretty forgettable.
So I've written here that the Great Kabuki seems to be a prototype for the Great Muta. If you just look at him, he's got the mist, he's got the mask, and he's got the face paint. And then Charlie Brown gives us more shucking and jiving, more babyface, early 80s bullshit. And Solie, as we're going into the match, mentions Bill Apter from PWI.
Right,
is in attendance. So we get an extended shine sequence at the start, or Charlie Brown for the first 6 to 8 minutes. Terrible offense. He's just nothing here.
This was bad. I don't know if I would put the opener or this match as the worst one of the night, but it's pretty stiff competition.
Brown puts a sleeper on Great Kabuki, and Solie tells us that the sleeper originated in the Orient.
Interestingly enough, of course, the sleeper hold originated in the Orient.
And he keeps on going on about the irony of this hold that came out from the Far East being put on the Kabuki. Then Coddle hypes Kabuki's martial arts knowledge.
It would be odd indeed and almost ironic justice if Charlie Brown could defeat him with that sleeper hold, because that hold originated in the Far East.
And speaking of the Far East, as many of the wrestlers are, but Kabuki possesses probably more knowledge of the martial arts, Gordon, than any wrestler in the ring today.
No question about it. We just saw an example of that, a savant-like blow to the chest, and then Kabuki catches him with a claw hold to the... he's got the claw hold to the head, clamping down on both temples.
And then Kabuki demonstrates it by putting on the claw hold. And I've written here, this is a crap hold. Hold on, give me 1 second here. I have to pause this. Hold on. All right, I'm back. Sorry, my wife has just returned, so I had to explain to her that I'm recording a wrestling podcast here. So yeah, where were we? The claw hold, and I just read, like, this is just the worst wrestling hold ever. Somebody puts of all the parts of the human body that can withstand pressure, the skull has got to be right at the top of that. I mean, what is this meant to do? I don't understand what this hold... Like...
Yeah, I mean, Kabuki, in the stuff I've seen from Japan in the later 80s and early 90s, he was very good as a kind of grizzled veteran tough guy role, but in the States, with what I've seen in this match and what I've seen in Texas, it's just a ton of nerve holds, claw holds, wrist holds, where he literally just has his hand on somebody's face or shoulder, and they're just laying there for, this match was 10 minutes, and that was 2 minutes of the match.
I don't understand how it's meant to hurt. Like, what?
Yeah, it's awful.
I even tried doing it to myself to see what it's meant to do. It just doesn't make. So anyway, we get a false hope spot from Charlie Brown here. He starts to make a comeback, and then Kabuki goes back to the claw, and Jesus Christ. And then the 24/7 version fast forwards here. This claw hold is so boring that they fast forward through it. And we get to our finish, which is basically an elbow drop by Brown, and so Solie wrongly calls that he's won the TV title. Like he says, he's won the TV title here, but then they don't know because he has to win it in the first 15 minutes, which is all a little bit confusing. And Solie keeps on talking about how this is a couple of £100,000 less to Gary Hart. So it's a lot of money for TV title.
Right. I've liked the instance of the match just doesn't end at the 15-minute time limit or whatever, but that's only when the title is up for grabs. But it was really confusing when the match ended and they couldn't tell you one way or the other whether he'd won or not.
Yeah, they should have made an announcement there and then, I think.
Absolutely.
This was a terrible match.
Yeah, this was awful.
Worst match of the match. I would even take the Bugsy McGraw stuff.
I tend to agree, because at least that had, a lot of motion. With the juking and jiving, maybe not as much action, but a lot of this was literally just laying around in a hole. So
I'm wondering
it
here
was awful.
how far this kind of tradition of Japanese wrestlers really dogging it in US matches. Did Kabuki originate this? Because I know Muta is notorious for just really putting on terrible matches. And
yeah, that'll be something that'll be interesting as we go through to see, whether. I don't know because Muta, I know, had some pretty bad American matches, but it was kind of in a time frame where he was also having pretty bad Japanese matches.
Yeah.
So, his 1989 work, which I know I appreciated the first time I watched it, it'll be interesting to see if I think that holds up or whatnot.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I hate this version of the claw. I think Kerry Von Erich's claw is a little bit lower down, and it attacks the face, right? Kerry's claw, he really does an effective job of, one, putting the other arm that he's not clenching the claw in, he puts that on his wrist to kind of give a sense of control and power, and then it does actually look like he's sort of trying to squeeze your face. Yeah.
So it does look certainly a lot more effective than this. And, part of that too is the way the person's selling the hold, which Charlie Brown in this match, that essentially meant kind of laying there and kicking his leg every once in a while. So that didn't help any matters, but Kerry certainly clenches the crawl better than what we saw here.
So yeah, awful. Then we're treated to a little interview spot here with Dude Walker. I have no idea who this guy is at all.
Yeah, I have no idea.
A local celebrity of some kind is all I could. Maybe he was like a radio DJ.
Yeah, it seemed like he was a DJ because he talked about a radio station. But yeah, not much here.
Yep. So good idea at the time. Probably doesn't. Local celebrity who doesn't. Probably nobody knows who he is now. And then there's we get kind of more analysis from Solie, who makes Flair the favourite for the main event, but he says don't underestimate Race.
Right.
And then we have more Schiavone with Race, Orton, and Slater. And this is where Race really goes into some psychology here. He reminds Flair of the pile driver. And that he says that his focus for the match is going to be the neck. That's my whole game plan tonight, he says, which is really quite good. You don't hear people talking like that often, where they say, I'm going to go after your neck in such a blatant way. So I enjoyed that.
Right.
I enjoyed that.
I enjoyed that too. Yeah.
So then, finally, we get Dusty Rhodes with a working microphone. Interesting promo here. He challenges the winner of the match, and then he calls Harley Race a folk hero, and he says he seems to me to pick out Race as the probable winner. He says,
"Yeah, this seemed weird. Everybody else, from the fans to wrestlers, had pretty much picked Flair, and Dusty in this promo, it's not, a heel promo, and I don't know if he was trying to say that he'll challenge whoever, but he kind of hopes it's Race to get some type of revenge, but he sort of puts up Race and acts like he thinks he's going to be victorious. It was kind of odd.
He says the folk hero cannot be denied, which is really a strange thing, but I wonder if he was thinking here, as the booker, that there's been a lot of people putting Flair over on the show, and somebody needed to maybe give some weight to the Race case. That's the only thing I could think of, because it's really strange. Somebody needed to hype Race, basically, to make this seem like less one-sided.
Right.
Anyway, we go from there into the dog collar and chain match, which may or may not be for the US title. And it's obviously Roddy Piper versus Greg the Hammer Valentine. I think the feud going into this match is that Valentine had injured Piper's ear with the ring bell, prefiguring Steamboat Savage by a number of years. And I think Bob Caudle did his most effective bit of commentary here. He really talks in detail about this chain and the danger of this match. And I guess this is the sort of big picture stuff that Bob Caudle is famous for. Just getting over the idea of danger, and how the chain, is a lethal weapon.
Yeah, Caudle can, in some matches, do a really good job of gaining the psychology of the match, and sort of that's something I've seen in the Smoky Mountain Wrestling that I've watched, and this was fabulous, and he did a fabulous job here.
And this is also the match that I think Solie starts getting more into his comfort zone here, because his commentary from pretty much here onwards is a lot more comfortable, a lot more kind of fluid, and he seems like more emotionally invested in this. So,
yes.
Like he says that Piper kind of saved him from some potential attack before, so he's like unabashedly supporting Piper for that personal reason. And he's particularly worried about how his physical condition, how injured he is, and they keep on talking about his equilibrium and his balance throughout the match.
Right.
And they really talk about this match. Solie says Piper scores the first psychological victory by whipping Valentine with a chain, and they got this over as not only a brutal battle but a psychological one as well throughout. And I think it's basically a Rocky story, right, where injured Piper takes a real beating out from Valentine, but Valentine can't put him away, which is pretty good psychology in this match.
Yeah, this is. I don't know where this will rank when the Death Valley Driver does the Mid-Atlantic Crockett set, but I can see it going really high because you have just great intensity. They use the stipulation of the dog collar really well with kind of a tug of war in the beginning, and then some absolutely brutal shots where they wrap the chain around Valentine wrapped the chain around Piper's eyes. Piper wrapped it then around Valentine's mouth, was really clinching it. This is just one of the classic matches.
He double wraps it around Valentine's face, so it's like not only around his mouth, but around the bridge of his nose. That looked really
it was
painful.
just nasty.
Absolutely brutal. And Valentine's just relentless in this match, going after Piper's ear. And
Right.
Piper's got like a really bloody ear. Looks quite nasty. And Solie keeps on not only talking about the psychology of the match and Piper's injury, he keeps on talking about Crockett as a pioneer of a new era of pro wrestling. And it's really from this moment on that there's a kind of narrative that emerges. Like he tries to tell this story of wrestling entering into a new era. And the booking actually starts looking pretty good from this match onwards for this entire show, I'd say. Caudle mentions at some point that the crowd is stunned into silence by this match, by the sheer brutality of it. And we get like lots and lots of attack from Valentine. And it goes back.
Yeah, there's just tons of punches to his ear. At one point, they went outside and got thrown into some chairs and the ring post and whatnot. It was just really good, and it didn't overstay its welcome, which I thought was nice too.
There's a really nasty Piper kind of makes a comeback at one point, and he whips Valentine on the top of the head. Look really nasty.
Yeah.
And then we have. I actually thought the ending was a little bit abrupt for me. It kind of like comes out of nowhere. Piper's on the second rope, and Valentine's on the second rope, and Piper kind of pulls the chain, and then does and then he just goes for the pin, and the match is over. So obviously this is a great match, but my only kind of slight complaint is that the ending is just kind of a little bit out of nowhere.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, Piper kind of goes nuts, hits him a couple times with the chain, and then one thing that I really liked was he scores the pin, and he uses the chain to sort of wrap his legs.
Yeah, that was really nice, actually.
Which I thought was awesome.
Yeah, great.
It was a little. I didn't think it was as dramatic as, for instance, the ending to the Magnum TA Tully Blanchard Cage I Quit match, which I'm sure this match can be compared to a good bit, but great match overall.
And Solie actually calls this a US title win, and then somebody must have had a word in his ear, because apparently the US title was not on the line.
Okay.
And then Solie starts calling it a moral victory. And then we get, as with every other match of this night, we get a post-match beatdown. Valentine just attacks Piper some more, whips him, hits the ref away, and Solie kind of calls Piper a man 5 yards wide, which it must be an expression that you guys have, because I've never heard of
that. I can't pin that one on me, as I can't say I've ever heard that one either.
A man and 5 yards wide. And you really get the impression during this match that Piper is like Solie's favourite. Like, he really likes Piper. So yeah, probably match of the night. Would you say this one?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll get to the other two matches. But this is clear my favorite match of the night. It really felt kind of like a heavyweight boxing match. Towards the end, where they were sort of slugging it out. Really, you could feel the punishment that had been dished out, and both guys looked exhausted, and it's an amazing match. It really is.
Yeah, and this is like Rocky Balboa going 15 rounds. That's the kind of like Valentine can't put Piper away, and he keeps on coming back. And there's a really nice transition late on when they have Valentine tries to suplex Piper. Piper gets the suplex, and I think from that moment, like, he really had momentum going into the finish. So I enjoyed that. So then we get Shivani again with Flair again, and Wahoo's there as well with his arm already in some sort of plaster, and just more kind of face Flair, in that Minnesota style voice of his. Wahoo says he'll bet all his money that Flair gets the win tonight.
Yeah, this was kind of a funny moment because Bob actually said he threw to Barbara, and then Tony started talking, which I found humorous. But this interview is really when I started to think about Starrcade 1993,
right?
Which they have all the Flair. You know, it starts out at his house, and then we get the limousine ride over with him and Mean Gene, and kind of how this seemed like a template for them using that 10 years later. So I thought that was neat.
Yeah, well, and Face Flair is a particular, like, he's like a family man. He really he really treating this match as a big deal, as like the most important moment of his life. And he really gets over the kind of gravity of the situation. Like, everything's riding on this.
Well, we're back in the dressing room with, and I'm sure I don't have to introduce these men, Nature Boy Ric Flair, former heavyweight champion, and, of course, Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood here with us. Rick, I've been over in Harley's dressing room, Harley Race's dressing room. He's been talking to his friends, he says, and he says he has something prepared, and I was wondering what you think of that.
Well, I hope that he is prepared for the match of a lifetime, because myself, Rick Steamboat, Jay Youngblood, we sit here. We know that in a very few moments we're going to be climbing into that ring with all the marbles on the line. I've prepared myself as hard mentally and physically as I can prepare myself. I'm ready for anything, and I want to take this opportunity in front of all these wonderful people that supported us to wish Jay Youngblood and Rick Steamboat all the luck in the world. I know they've helped me. This is our night, and we're not going to let anybody down.
And then we go from that to Barbara, who's with Don Knodel, who gives the lamest, most boring babyface. He just picks Flair as the winner here. And they do mention that Don Knodel was the tag champ with Sergeant Slaughter, and they mentioned Slaughter a few times, and I had to wonder, he wasn't in Mid-Atlantic at this time. He must have either been with AWA or with Vince already, right?
Yeah, I don't know where he was here, but yeah, I was kind of surprised that they mentioned him by name also.
So we go from that into the tag titles. Jack and Jerry Briscoe versus Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. The Briscoes, they had a stake in Georgia, famously, so they must have been from the Georgia roster, not from the Mid-Atlantic roster. Is that right? And
they also Florida. Also, they're mainly in Florida as well. I think by this time as a tag team, that's where they were mostly featured.
So, but like the titles can be defended on across the shows, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the world title, where they would go every once in a while to different promotions to defend against the top team.
So there's a strange stipulation on this match where the titles can change hands in a DQ, which was an odd thing to mention, given that we don't get a DQ finish.
Yeah, and it's not exactly a brawling type match either. Which, I mean, you would think maybe they would do that because they would think the Briscoes, to kind of keep them under control. I know sometimes that stipulation is used, but the Briscoes weren't exactly known as brawlers. So
the ref here was King Kong Angelo Mosca again in a PWI shirt.
Yeah, he made it.
So there he is, and clear heels are the Briscoes, who get loudly booed when they're. And Solie hypes a couple of things here. He hypes the amount of scholarships that the Briscoes had. Jack Briscoe was a former NWA champ. It takes him a while to get that out, but he does mention it eventually. And he just talks about their numerous qualifications and amateur background and all of this sort of thing. So Solie's in his element talking about the Briscoes, I get the impression. And the Briscoes really work this as a classic kind of consummate heel tag team, quick tags in and out. And they take the early control. We get a trademark arm drag from a steamer at one point. And there's a little bit of intrigue going into this match. Cottle mentions that Briscoe said they didn't want to be a part of Starrcade, but Crockett bought a contract for a match they'd signed in Kansas and moved it to Greensboro, which is not the most exciting angle, to be honest. And then Solie says again, we're in a new era of pro wrestling. And he mentions that both the Briscoes are southpaws. And we get an extended heel in peril segment on Jerry Briscoe. What did you think? I actually was quite impressed by Jay Youngblood in this match. He came across as being, I mean, obviously Steamboat is the senior partner in this team, but he held his own in this match, I thought.
Yeah, I thought he did good in the when he was in the peril section. The beginning of this match, I kind of was so on. There was sort of a lot of kind of filling out process, arm bars, Steamboat coming off the top rope and then hooking on an arm bar, sort of a lot of restarts. But once that Steamboat and Youngblood started getting worked on by the Briscoes, I think the match picked up a good bit. Yeah. There was one, I know in my notes I talked about a weird pinning technique they were using with kind of a bridge. He'd have his arms around the waist and then would bridge up to roll his shoulders down, which looked amateur wrestling-ish, and that was kind of weird.
This is the position you end up in after a German suplex.
Yeah, essentially that's what it was, where he just sort of hooked it on as a pinning combination. And then he also, they did a very interesting key lock submission that was hooked in tightly and the arms were wrapped around, and Steamboat did a great job selling the hold and then ended up deadlifting him up in kind of a backline power spot type move.
I've just written here bizarre maneuver as Steamboat lifts from a submission, and that was a really strange, I've never seen that before. It was very interesting.
Bob Backlund does that in some of his matches where he'll be in a submission and lift him up as kind of a feat of strength. But I thought it looked really good there.
Well, when the Briscoes gain control, Jack Briscoe does a couple of showcase moves, like he does a shotgun off the top rope. I think, did they call it a shotgun or a stun gun?
I can't remember what they called it exactly. That's essentially what it was. It was the stun gun. Yeah, that's what I wrote.
Chin lock, backdrop, double underhook suplex.
That was a nice underhook suplex too.
He looks really good. He does a suplex on Youngblood a bit later, and Jack Briscoe's real smooth. He's probably one of the better wrestlers we see on the show. And Jerry kind of looks decent. While he's obviously not as good as his brother, but he looked pretty good in everything he did in this match.
Yeah, I think they definitely positioned Jerry as the weaker member of the team.
Yeah.
But he did a good job in this match, kind of mixing in, tagging in and out and whatnot. And the match was good, I thought, overall.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The beginning, like I said, I really didn't like that much. The ending was kind of, it wasn't great either, where you kind of have a little Steamboat lifts Youngblood and sort of slams him down onto Briscoe to pin him.
It's basically a gorilla press, isn't it? He does a gorilla press.
Yeah, he kind of does like a gorilla press to throw him down, and I wasn't crazy about that either. So, while I thought the match was good, I didn't think it was great or a classic or anything.
There's a couple of interesting, we get a lateral guillotine at one point. So I think the Briscoes bust out some of these amateur moves that we don't really see very often.
Right.
And then when Steamboat gets the hot tag, they do a lot of kind of babyface style double teaming of double flying chop, double. They do this fun little thing where Steamboat picks up Youngblood and they get a kick off an Irish whip, and then the finish, like you mentioned. Yeah, it was all right, this match, I thought. It wasn't great or anything, but I think it showed us what both teams could do. And then after the title switch, Solie keeps on hyping now. This is a new era of pro wrestling. I think that's basically the narrative of the night, that there's a big kind of passing over of the torch from the old 70s guys to the younger generation. There's a little bit of post-match, as every other match. The Briscoes tried to do a beatdown. They put figure 4 on Steamboat, and Angelo Mosca comes in and blocks the double team. And then the Youngblood and Steamboat get to celebrate in the ring, and they really make this seem like a massive win here. They put it over as being a huge deal, this title win. And the note I put here is that the Briscoes put this team over huge on this kind of big stage. You know, obviously they were reputable guys, and to put them over clean right in the middle, pretty big win.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job of putting them over. One thing that I wrote down was they did have a really good celebration at the end, but then inexplicitly the credits started running.
Oh yeah, this was really weird.
This is very bizarre, where we get pretty much Solie runs down everybody from the producer, Jim Crockett, on down to essentially the guy that was giving them water. And we got cameramen, pretty much the rundown of everybody that worked on this show.
Our technical director, Emerson Lawson, and in charge of all of the good folks here handling our cameras, and our video director now, Pete Brown. Another man that I can't speak too highly of. All of these people are the people behind the microphones, behind the scenes. And in charge of audio is Harold Caldwell. On videotape is Wayne Daniel. He's brought us the slow-mos tonight, the instant replays, and certainly is doing a magnificent job.
This was really tiresome as a time kill. I mean, why did he have to go through the credits? And he just does it totally straight-laced, without, as if this was a natural thing to do.
Yeah, it was really bizarre. And all this is happening while Youngblood and Steamboat continue to celebrate, which sort of, I don't know if they had done a good job of hyping the main event, but it almost looked like this was the end of the show.
Yeah, I kind of thought that one of the things that finish lacked, one of the things that match lacked was a David Crockett figure to go crazy. So even though Solie and Coddle were reasonably excited here, they still didn't really go beyond their usual kind of selves. They didn't get excited or anything.
Yeah, in the next match, the main event too, even the finish of that match, I did not think they got, and exceptionally excited for what, in their own words, is the new beginning of wrestling or whatnot.
Yeah, so a loon like David Crockett would have helped sell this a bit more.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So anyway, this is after these really weird credits that Solie gives us, where he doesn't just he names every single cameraman by name, like he goes. For the last time, we go into Flair's locker room, and Tony is with Charlie Brown, who gives a really high energy hype promo. Probably one of the better kind of high energy promos of the night. And then Piper comes in, says, "You got one more ear to go, Valentine," and he's pretty psyched about his win. And then Steamboat and Youngblood. The face locker room is pretty happy at this time because all the faces have gone over tonight. They're 3 for 1 on the big matches. Only Orton and Slater got heel wins.
Yeah, I mean the first half of the show was dominated by the heels winning. Kind of then, I guess most of the face teams were enhancement, but yeah, and the big matches, the baby faces all go over.
Steamboat and Youngblood, 5 times champs now, they mention, which is a record. And I thought Jay Youngblood was surprisingly decent on the mic. And Steamboat talks about how they may not be the biggest or the strongest, but they adopt different styles. They adapt different styles to different opponents, which gives them an edge, which is an interesting thing to say. And I mean, looking at this kind of as a inverted commas smart fan, the fact that 3 big baby face wins going into this may suggest that Race may be going over. That Race may be winning this. If you just think about the booking pattern, usually if the main event ends with a heel win, they give a lot of babyface wins on the undercard, or vice versa. So it was surprising that there's so many big babyface wins here.
Right.
The only thing that suggests that it's going to be Flair is the fact that Orton and Slater won their match. And, that would have been strange. So it's time for the big event. Flair's music, the arena goes black and we get Flair's music. This music was for Flair, right? It wasn't just music for the match itself. Because it was a pretty big moment.
Yeah, this whole entrance really, I thought, was amazing. And sort of, it felt big time where the music starts, we get some fog, some kind of spotlights, a little pyro of all things, and then, Flair just kind of emerging with a robe, and then he walks down the aisle, and I always love that the one girl gives him a kiss on the cheek as he makes his way down, and this really felt like a big time person entering the arena, and I thought this was wonderful.
Yeah, no, Gene Knitsky is the former champ. He's the referee here, and we have some interesting commentary here by Solie, and I actually thought that Solie did a really good job on this last match because he talks about intensity and execution, intensity and execution are the most important things in this match, and the man who's the most intense, the man who executes the best, is going to win this match. And then he starts going on about how Race began wrestling at 17. Flair has a more amateur background, coming from the University of Minnesota, and the name on the marquee is wrestling. And this all seems really big time now after that wonderful introduction. The only thing I did think here is that Race seemed like, coming into the match, Race looked like a man who thought he may be losing here. Did you get a sense of that?
Yeah. In contrast to Flair, who has this great entrance with, everything going on, Race, the champion, he just sort of appears out of nowhere, kind of wanders down the aisle. He has his robe on, which is a robe that he wears, but to me it always looks like a bathrobe, so I've never liked his robe with the Race on it. And he sort of, he definitely was playing his persona as kind of a low-key type figure, but just, being the champion, it did seem kind of anticlimactic after we just got all this with Flair.
He just seemed to be a little bit sheepish, I guess, compared to, it's not like he gave the impression that he was up for this and ready for it. He seemed a little bit scared, I guess, going in.
Right.
And I don't know if, what the thing I couldn't work out was that just Race being Race, or was that Race intentionally trying to give off that impression? Because
Race is somebody that, and in this match, he throws out a ton of moves that you just don't see. We got pile drivers, we got swinging neck breaker, power slam, kind of a power slam shoulder breaker type thing. Yeah. Uses a lot of headbutts. So Race was somebody that really did do a ton of moves for this era.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think this was more, from what I've seen of him, this was more kind of his usual persona.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more about his general demeanor, the look on his face and how he was behaving.
Yeah, it did look a little defeated. I don't know if he was, legit pissed at dropping the title, or if he wanted to do a more subdued facial expressions, or kind of what the deal was there.
So he keeps this narrative of intensity and execution going right through the match, and he notes twice now Race has failed to execute, and they basically coddle and slowly speculate about Race being off his game tonight. That he's not quite he's not quite flying on all cylinders for the first half of this match. And I guess as the match goes on, he gains more and more control. And then they put it down to Race's experience, which is kind of the story of the match, I guess, where there's some really good counter wrestling in the first half of the match from Flair. And then we get Race starts using the cage more and more in his offense, and Flair's face becomes very, very bloodied, like absolutely covered. And I just thought I'd mention that the ring is absolutely covered in blood from the previous matches of the night. I mean, there's a lot.
When they did that shot from the ceiling, you could really see it. All the blood that was on the canvas.
Yeah, and I've got it written here in massive capital letters, great overhead shot, and you can see all the blood from all the different matches. This is a very bloody event in general, compared to what we're used to seeing. There's a lot of blood on this show.
Right. I sort of had a problem. I had two main problems with this match. One, which we'll probably talk about in a little bit towards the end, is Kanitsky, and two is I didn't really think they used the cage very well, and I don't know if they were trying to kind of go for a sort of a technical wrestling masterpiece type match with the cage just being. I mean, I understand the cage was there because Race had the bounty on Flair's head, whatnot.
Orton and Slater interfering, basically.
Yeah, right. So that's fine, but I would have loved them. I mean, I wrote in my notes that Race uses the cage for the first time around 10 minutes in. So we were almost halfway through this match, and even throughout the match, they mixed the cage in more in the later half of the match, but there was a lot of kind of wrestling, and I don't know, it just didn't really fit for me as like what I kind of expect from a cage match, blow off type match to a feud.
A lot of Flair's offense is very, like, he does a butterfly suplex, he does a pile driver. There's a lot of technical wrestling here. You're right that it's not. It doesn't feel like a heated. It's nothing like a kind of blood feud match like the Piper Valentine.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I really noticed. I mean, Gordon does use this motif of intensity and execution, but I mean, the intensity in this match was clearly not as high as it was in the Piper Valentine match. So, I mean, the execution, I think, did play a big role in what happened, but the intensity was lacking.
Yeah, I can't make my mind up about Race because, like, over the old All Japan set, I was with one person who kind of ragged on Tenryu, basically from 80 to 87, but always come across like he just doesn't give a shit. Like, his face never changes. He never looks like he cares. It never looks like it's a big, emotional affair. And Race in this match was pretty cold. Like, he's kind of it doesn't seem like the biggest match of his life. I know he has that kind of look of defeat going in, but as the match progresses, there's not really any real hatred there, which would be the kind of big problem I have with this match. That it doesn't seem heated enough.
Right.
From his point of view, from Race, because Flair is Flair. He's always going to give you even as babyface, he's going to give you he's going to give you a Flair performance. But Race for me, he's a bit of a cold fish. Almost kind of not quite Dory Funk Jr. levels, but it's getting towards it.
Yeah, he was very kind of stoic. Here. I thought Flair, when he did his comeback at the end, was really good, strutting around. He yelled out a woo at one time, which I really enjoyed. But yeah, I agree. I would definitely not tout this as like a signature performance by Race or anything.
And then we get a big celebration, obviously, and there's no Race still wants to fight, but there's no post-match beatdown, thankfully, for this.
Right.
And Flair gets his moment in the sun in front of his home crowd, and there's a ton of interviews and kind of analysis now And there's a big narrative from Coddle and from Solie about maybe this being Race's big, this is basically like Race's big last run here he's done as a kind of main event title holding draw, which is interesting because Race gives a promo where he says he's not giving up. He's not throwing the towel in here, and he's probably one of the best lines of the night. This night was arranged for you, Ric Flair.
Right.
And there was that feeling, he got that massive entrance, hometown. The show is called Starrcade, Flair for the gold. So it's almost like the night was custom built for him.
Harley, I'm sorry.
What can I say, Barbara? Other than I did it 7 times. There's not a thing on the face of God's green earth that stands in my way of doing it 8 times. Other than the likes of the Dusty Rhodes and the ultimate Ric Flair. And a few people in that category. I've been there. I've done it all. Flair, this is your night of glory. The night that was arranged for you. Please, please believe me when I tell you this. That I'm not packing it up and going away and hide. I'm going to hound you like you've never been hounded before in your life. You drove me absolutely insane for 6 months. I'll guarantee you that you'll live through hell until you meet me again.
Yeah, you definitely felt a changing of the guard type narrative from this match. But one thing I wanted to ask you is what you thought about Knitsky in this match, because as much as the cage thing bothered me, I could sort of look past that because I could say they were reaching for, like I said, a more technical style match mixing in the cage. Yeah. But I thought Knitsky was just absolutely awful as the referee. And I don't know if you've seen the Flair, Kerry Von Erich Star Wars cage match with Michael Hayes. Have you seen that match before?
I haven't seen that one yet, no.
Okay, well, and in that match, Michael Hayes is the referee, and that sort of is what starts the Von Erich Freebirds feud, and he sort of does a lot of the same things Knitsky does here, where he pulls, the competitors off from each other, and it's sort of annoying, and then at the end snaps. And that actually works because that starts one of the best feuds in the territory history. Here, it just seemed like Knitsky was just being a dick. He didn't understand, what type of match it was in. It seemed stupid. He blocked, Flair a couple of times when he went on offense.
Yeah.
And then the ending, I assume Race is supposed to trip over him, which I don't know why they couldn't just go with a straight, clean finish. Yeah. But it looked terrible where he barely kind of slipped over Knitsky, and I don't know if anything resulted from this, whether they were planning on having a big Knitsky comeback feud versus Race, which seems odd given Knitsky's age, but I just thought he was absolutely awful.
He had no place in this match. He got in the way a lot. I felt like he was just an unwanted presence, basically. When was he? He was NWA champ, like, before Dory Funk Jr., right? So,
yeah. We're talking late 60s, real early 70s when he was in his heyday.
There's just no need to have a guest ref here. Like, he doesn't need to be in this match at all.
Yeah.
And, surely they weren't planning for a comeback or an angle involving him. And he just seemed like he was trying to maybe get himself over a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. That was one thing. Like, I don't know whether. It seemed sort of towards the end that pretty much Flair and Race both just sort of said the hell with you and sort of ignored him. Which I kind of would have liked to see Solie do, but Solie kept, even in the closing minutes of the match when he was clearly hurting the flow and dragging them away, slowly kept touting up how he was doing this fabulous job, and it was just, it really affected my enjoyment overall.
For me, this is not a great match anyway. Let's just say if Knitsky wasn't in it for a second, let's just say none of that stuff happened. At most, I'd be giving it like a 3.5. Because for me, even though we get some cool offense from Race, like the lack of emotion hurts things for me quite a lot. Considering this is meant to be such a big deal for him. With Knitsky's involvement again, I may even dock it like a whole star, maybe half a star, something like that. If we were giving star ratings. So yeah, this is not like, considering the rep of this match, considering how important it is. It's a good but not great in my view.
Yeah, this is a match I would definitely. It'll be interesting to see if this goes on the Crockett 80 set, because it's so historically significant. I can see some people defending it if they really sort of ignore Knitsky and say he was just trying to enforce the rules, and they did dig the psychology of the sort of the wrestling mixed in with the cage, but it just really did not hit it smart for me. I mean, it felt like a big moment at the end, but to me, the entrance and the ending with, that iconic image of Flair with his head looking down with the blood, getting his hand raised, that's a lot better than the actual match that we saw.
Absolutely. And I mean, if this match had been on the All Japan set, it would have been like 120 plus on that.
Oh yeah, I would even say it'd probably be close to bottom 10 for me.
Yeah. There was a kind of general narrative for the whole night of the passing of the torch, and this is kind of the cherry on the cake. But the whole idea that we're moving from the late 70s, early 80s era into kind of a new bunch of characters, a new era for Crockett and for wrestling in general. And I thought Solie was pretty good at putting that over in general, over the course of the evening. But just before we finish here, I'd like to have a little talk about Solie and about Coddle. For me, an announcer is probably there to get over narrative, to get over angles, to get over the guys. And for me, Solie basically method acts wrestling and treats it like a legit sport. So there are little things that I'd imagine, Shivani wouldn't do, for example. Like, Shivani wouldn't have kept on going on about Knitsky during the match, as you mentioned. But Solie, because his whole deal is being, he calls wrestling like a legit sport, he couldn't ignore it, because that's what somebody, that's what a legit sports announcer would do. And I'm kind of like, I know he's got a reputation as being greatest of all time, but for me, on this showing, and whenever I've heard Solie, I'm not feeling it. He just feels like it's just not something that I'd look for in an announcer. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I thought Solie here at times, like I said in the beginning, I thought he seemed sort of disorganized or unfamiliar. In the final matches, I thought, like in the Piper Valentine match, he did a good job, but in the main event, he kept going back to these narratives that, I always sort of like an announcer to kind of be what the viewer is thinking.
Yeah.
And I just think any objective viewer would be like, I'm pissed off at what Knitsky keeps doing.
Yeah.
Whereas Solie sort of, he did treat it like a standard news or sports broadcast where he just sort of called the action, didn't even question any actions going on besides stuff that was explicitly explained to him. And so I didn't really connect with that at all.
I actually thought this show would have been stronger, bizarrely, if the team had been Coddle and David Crockett. There needed to be somebody there to get over the emotion, you need a color man, basically. And I don't there were times when Solie, obviously for this match, for example, he had a thesis, right? He had a thesis that he'd worked out that was all about intensity, all about execution. And he just kept on pushing his own thesis, throughout the match.
Right.
Even though Race clearly lacked any sort of intensity for the entire evening. So it's like there was a kind of disconnect between what he was saying and what was actually happening. which is a little bit distracting for me. So yeah, maybe we should go through who we thought, match of the night for me was probably the Piper Valentine by some distance.
Yeah, I got Piper Valentine as my favorite match of the night. I would actually say the Orton Slater Wahoo Youngblood tag match would probably be my second favorite match of the night.
Easily.
Yeah.
And I did like the Briscoes.
Yeah, I thought that was a good match. Just not. I know on the reviews I've seen for this show, as far as Scott Keith and whatnot, I mean, it was hovering around 4 stars, and I certainly didn't think it was at that level.
No,
but good match.
I mean, if I was gonna give star ratings here, I'd give it about 3. That match, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
I would rank it ahead of the Flair race. I really am not a fan of. I really don't think that match is all it's correct. Like, some people would say that's a 5-star classic or an all-time, an all-time match. Obviously, it's historically important, but
yeah, I would think that's just nostalgia, mostly, kind of clouding the actual match.
How about what do you guys call it? MVP, man of the match?
Yeah, most valuable player. I would say, I don't know, I would say Valentine. I thought this was one of his best matches I've ever seen him in.
Definitely.
He's somebody I've been pretty indifferent on throughout most of the work I've seen of him, but I thought he did a great job really attacking Piper, looking more intense than he usually does. He kind of, I think, can fall into sort of what you was talking about with Race, where he sometimes doesn't look like he really cares.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought he really turned in a great performance in his match.
Yeah, and if I was going to go for it, probably, I mean, Piper was pretty good in that match as well,
Oh, yeah, Piper was great, which I expect. I was thinking Valentine was just more of a surprise.
If I was going to, I might do something controversial and say that the MVP for me is probably Bob Orton. I thought he was really good in that match.
Oh yeah, he was absolutely.
And I thought he was just probably the best kind of like dick heel performance of the night was from him as well. Like he seemed like those guys seemed like proper heels. And obviously, like, I'm used to a much more character driven product. From the WWF and even from later on in Crockett, so it was nice to have a bit of character in there in this environment where all the babyfaces are kind of just like boring guys who just want to win or dancing idiots. Like basically, you've only got 2 types of babyfaces at this time, right? You've got Steamboat, straight-laced kind of goody two shoes, or you've got Jimmy Valiant, dancing idiot. That's all you've got, You've got your Dusty or you've got your Steamboat. So yeah, it was nice to have a bit of character.
All right.
How about kind of worst person on the night?
There's probably some stiff competition on that. I would probably lean towards Kabuki, just because, like I said, with what I've watched in All Japan from the late 80s, early 90s, I know he can be a real effective worker, and here he just brought nothing to the table in his match.
I would also go for Kabuki, just because doing that awful claw move for about 10 minutes is unforgivable. For anybody who does that is going to be worse on the night. But also, Knitsky's got to be in the conversation now as well.
Oh yeah. Overall performance, Knitsky, I mean, he really did. Like, I agree with you that if he never existed in that match, it wouldn't be a great match. But it was really one of the most frustrating matches I've watched in quite some time, where, repeatedly I kept saying, why doesn't he just stop and let these guys, do their thing?
Absolutely. So just wrapping up here, I mean, it was interesting to go through this show, and I think the next show will be Starrcade 84, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how that older generation of kind of 70s guys gradually fade out, and we're going to see more and more kind of new guys debuting. on these shows, and that transition is going to be. I mean, it's already started to happen in quite a big way on this show. But I'm guessing next time there's going to be, a lot less of your, Rufus R. Jones type characters on the card. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops. And I guess the plan here is for us to, eventually we'll end up in Greed 2001, right?
Yeah, we'll go all the way up till when it closes. Take the long journey together.
Yep, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, and maybe we'll make a couple of stop-offs in the AWA as we're doing it. But thank you very much for that. We'll look forward to working with you further.
All right, thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you very much, Chad.
Fans, for all of us here at WCW Center Stage, for Cowboy Bill Watts and the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, I'm Jim Ross saying good night, everybody.